Alright, hello everybody. The video we're going to be reviewing today is The Crop That Destroyed Entire Countries by Sean Groves. I'm going to add uh, my review at the end. This guy's got a lot to say. It's good stuff.
If you were alive 5,000 years ago, having a sweet tooth wasn't really normal. It was actually extremely rare to meet someone who actually knew what it meant for something to be sweet. To taste something sweet, you would have to find a honeycomb in a hollow tree or maybe a drop of sap from a maple tree if you lived in the right climate. Sweetness was more short-lived. It was something that you stumbled upon instead of owning. But then someone discovered a grass that could grow more than anything else, even in soil that wasn't good for growing. And that grass was sugarcane. Humans are actually really interesting creatures. We roam the earth, putting things in our mouth just to see what they taste like. People noticed that these stalks of grass were super sweet when you chewed on them, and it's almost human nature to want more. And the early techniques to get more was actually really easy. People would pound or grind sugarcane using stones or wooden tools, kind of like they did with grains. Over generations, this is what led to experiments with boiling the juice to create solid sugar. Sugarcane originated in New Guinea, but the story of it being turned into sugar traces back to ancient India.
I started All Nation Restoration to help people. Chase for Business is literally what it says in the name. It is Chase for Business, where I can find everything I need in one place, so we can help people
you
get
too,
back to
ads.
life.
By 500 BC, farmers had already learned not to just chew the cane, but to crush it and boil it down. I want you guys to imagine what that actually meant. For the first time, sweetness wasn't just for the moment. It could finally be stored for weeks or traded for other crops. At that very point in history, for the first time, flavor became currency. From India, sugar spread westward. In Persia, refiners perfected all new techniques. They found ways to clarify and purify sugar, inventing new methods like filtering and using lime to remove impurities. They mastered the art of crystallization by turning liquid sweetness into solid crystals. By the time of Alexander the Great, travelers were already writing about, and I quote, reeds that make honey without bees. Basically, sugarcane. But it was really in the Islamic Golden Age where sugar went from a luxury to a global commodity. Muslim scholars would teach about the cultivation of sugarcane and how it was crystallized, usually teaching the science of sugarcane in madrasa. They were the colleges of Islamic instructions. As the Islamic Empire expanded, they made the techniques even better, and over hundreds of years, it spread through North Africa, Spain, and even the Mediterranean. Once sugar was deeply rooted in the Eastern Mediterranean, it awaited yet another leap. During the 12th century, European crusaders took control of key cities like Jerusalem and Tyre. They came face to face with the thriving sugar industry developed by the Muslims. The Crusaders were almost desperate to find a sweetener because in Europe, their primary sweetener was honey, and that was kind of a big problem because honey is seasonal. It was almost pretty much rare. You couldn't transport honey too far without it crystallizing or fermenting, so the local Arab scholars taught them about sugar production. They brought sugarcane and barrels of sugar back to medieval Europe, and to a Europe that didn't really know much about sweetness, it was almost unthinkable. In 1200, a pound of sugar was worth more than a pound of gold. Apothecaries, who were early pharmacists, would use sugar as a preservative and help to make medicines taste better. Rich nobles even shaped sugar into castles and sculptures for their feast. But Europe had a problem. Sugarcane doesn't just grow anywhere. It's very sensitive to cold weather and it needs a lot of water. But the European climates were either too wet or too dry at the wrong times for growing sugarcane. So because of that, sugar became a commodity only for the wealthy, which meant it had extremely high trade value. By the 15th century, Europeans stumbled onto something that would shift the trajectory of humanity, the tropical climate of the Caribbean. Places like the Canary Islands, European settlers quickly started establishing plantations, but these plantations needed workers. So Europeans and plantation owners tried to pay laborers for sugarcane work. The problem was no one wanted to do it. It was extremely hard and it was pretty dangerous. The fields of cane were razor sharp, slicing the skin of workers who cut it. The mills had to run day and night, boiling cane juice before it spoiled. And so they did what any logical human would do. They shut it down. I'm just joking. They turned to slavery. At first, they started with the native Caribbean people. The problem was they were dying from diseases. Their immune systems weren't adapted to the infectious diseases that the Europeans brought with them. Smallpox, measles. The Europeans wiped out more than 70% of the native populations. And so they turned to West Africa. West Africa had long established and active trademarks with Europe, and they were already engaged in internal slavery. That's what led to the largest forced migration in human history. Millions of men and women and even children were forced onto ships, many of them never surviving the crossing. But for those who did, it was rough. The life expectancy on a plantation was usually less than a decade, and yet sugar fed Europe's hunger like nothing else ever did. Tea, coffee, and even chocolate, all bitter on their own, became the new daily drinks of Europe once sugar sweetened them. What used to be a privilege of the kings became a cravings of the masses. And it was at that point where sugar became the world's unofficial most addictive substance. Studies today show that sugar lights up the same reward pathways in the brain as addictive drugs, which meant that the moment humans had sugar, there was no turning back. Sugar practically built empires. Portugal and Spain grew rich off of Brazilian cane. Britain turned Jamaica and Barbados into sugar islands, their wealth fueling London banks and navies. France turned Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti, into the richest colony in the world, producing almost half of all the sugar in Europe. But that wealth was sitting on a knife's edge. The enslaved outnumbered their colonizers many times over. In Haiti, people whispered about a revolution. Enslaved workers would risk their lives to meet in secret, planning ways to throw off the French rulers. In 1791, fires lit up the night sky. Plantations burned, and that's when the Haitian Revolution had begun. France had sent their troops. Napoleon himself had tried to stop it. But the enslaved were led by Toussaint Louverture, fighting back with the furiosity born of the centuries of suffering. And by 1804, Haiti had declared their independence, becoming the first free black republic in the entire world. And it wasn't just a political victory, it was the sugar's empire cracking under its own weight. The shockwaves were pretty much global. France lost its wealthiest colony. Britain feared rebellion in Jamaica. The United States, watching closely, doubled down on slavery in its own cotton field. Sugar had given Europe more power than they ever needed, but it also had lit the fuse of revolution. The revolution in Haiti didn't just send shockwaves through politics, it tore through sugar trade itself. France had lost their biggest colony and the world's biggest source of sugar. By the early 1800s, nearly all of Europe's sugar came from British-controlled Caribbean colonies, especially Jamaica and Barbados. But then came the Napoleonic War. Britain's navy dominated the seas, cutting off France and much of continental Europe from overseas trade. And suddenly, sugar, the thing that everyone had grown addicted to, vanished. What used to sweeten tea almost immediately became a luxury again. And that's when Napoleon decided to do something no one expected. He launched a campaign for sugar independence, telling his scientists to find a way to make sugar without relying on the tropics. Napoleon had saw it as more than food, it was strategy. In 1747, a German chemist named Andreas Marggraf found that red beets had sucrose. It's very similar to what's found in sugarcane. But the sugar concentration in red beets were too low for profitable extraction, so the idea was mostly theoretical. But fast forward a few decades, one of his own students selectively bred beets with a higher sugar content, creating the first true sugar beet strains by the late 1700s. So when Napoleon found this out, he demanded nearly 70,000 acres be planted with these beets, and then he poured money into new factories to process them. It wasn't about sweetening coffee anymore. It was about power and breaking free from Britain's grip on the sugar trade. That one singular decision changed the sugar industry forever, because even after the wars ended, Europe didn't go back. The infrastructure was built, the beet farms, the factories, the workers who knew how to refine it, and as the industry spread, it eventually crossed the Atlantic. By the late 1800s, the United States started planting sugar beets in its northern states, places that were too cold for sugarcane, and that legacy still stands. Today, more than half of America's sugar, over 50%, comes from beets, a decision made in the chaos of war, reshaping what sweetness meant for the modern world, which meant that by the time peace reached Europe, sugar was no longer something that was just growing in the tropics. It had become a global crop and an unstoppable business. The the shadow of sugar never really disappeared. Indian and Chinese workers were shipped to plantations in the Caribbean and even Fiji, people's lives still being consumed in pursuit of that sweetness. And today, sugar is everywhere. Soda cans, ketchup bottles, cereals marketed to children. What was once rare is now almost unavoidable. Sugar gave us the power to make sweetness permanent, but in return, it demanded generations of labor, lives, and landscapes. Sugar is an empire, it's an addiction, and rebellion, all crystallized into something we barely notice as it dissolves in our tea. And maybe that's the strangest part. We taste sugar every day, but we rarely taste its story, which is pretty insane.
Props to Sean Grows for that video. He goes over a lot of pretty good stuff. I'm gonna just go through it. So sugar beets became a primary source of sugar in continental Europe by 1880. So more than 50% by 1880, allegedly. Yeah. Current day, however, allegedly, about 20% of all sugar globally is beet sugar, and the remaining 80% is cane sugar. So that means for every 1 gram out of 5 grams is beet sugar, and 4 grams is cane sugar. And that probably is accurate globally. Maybe more beet sugar in European nations, but who really knows? I'm going to look at the ancestor for sugarcane because I'm curious. Complex mix of wild species, primarily native to New Guinea and India. First millennium BC. From India and China, hybridized the New Guinean varieties. This genetic mixing created the commercial sugarcane used today. Saccharum spontaneum. Let's see. Saccharum spontaneum, wild sugarcane, is a grass native throughout much of tropical and subtropical Asia. Plantae kingdom, angiosperms, monocots. We'll just focus on those two right now. In my other video, Veganism is Sin, I go over this phylogenetic tree. I'm going to start, I guess, with plantae, land plants, right? And if you look here, eudicots, monocots. So I think it's interesting that sugar cane is closely related to wheat. Wheat is the primary source of carbohydrates in the United States today. Angiosperms, pine. So pine, wheat, monocots, avocado. And then on the other side, we got the actual sugar cane here. So close relatives to sugar cane would be lemongrass, pineapple, sour gum, rye, barley. Not far off either is corn, wild rice, wheat, and oat. I find it interesting that plant agriculture is responsible in this example for slavery of the world. And I think it's interesting. They use sugarcane for the poor now, where they used it for the rich in the past because of its scarcity and The same thing is true of Mexican natives using corn and wild rice. And the same thing is true of European natives using oat and wheat. So it's literally just going through all of these here, poisoning the country, causing chaos. Monocots, there's wheat, poppy seed, and oh look, asterids. Interesting. But that's kind of a branch, a little bit of a stretch. Interesting. Common ancestor, I wonder what that was. I think that was all of the chart here that I wanted to really outline, but yeah, wheat. Oh, whoops. Wheat. Yeah. Oat, wheat, rice, wild rice, corn, barley, rye, sorghum, sugarcane, lemongrass, and pineapple are very, very closely related. And they all come from a common ancestor. If you want more context into that, check out my Veganism is Sin video. And I go over that a little bit more. Hope everybody's having a great day. Peace.